Ship. This week we've got a really interesting subject that I happen to love as a guy who's made some questionable decisions about ambitious ideas over the years, sometimes arguably too ambitious. I can always appreciate a subject like attempting the impossible. And so I've got a guy joining us today called Pete Sena, who I had the pleasure of being introduced to by Brett Colbert, who's a partner in Chameleon Collective and actually a former O Ship Show guest, who founded the digital agency Digital Surgeons. Now, if you haven't heard of Digital Surgeons before, these guys have been around for a really long time. The agency was originally uh, founded in 2004. I sadly remind Pete a minute ago he's been doing this for 18 years, which I think made him happy, excited, and terrified all at the same time. But this is someone who's really been around the block when it comes to designing digital experiences. He's worked for the U.S. Open. He's worked for Unilever. He's done Sperry, Elizabeth Arden. He did Lego, which I'm super jealous of on a side note. Did Camelback, and he's even worked with celebrities like Lady Gaga. Uh, it's funny, we even had a strange connection. He wrote a great article about the death of Flash, where he even noted actually a project that me and some of my friends developed called Happiness Factory 3 for Coca-Cola. So we've been interconnected over the years, and I think admiring each other's work. But I gotta give hats off to Pete. He is a lot of balls, frankly, a lot of bravery and a lot of ambition in trying to attempt the impossible. And I thought it'd be really interesting to bring him on today and have him talk about, how you do that as a business owner, when it's a good idea, when it's not a good idea, and maybe what some of the implications of that can be for building a business. So with that, I welcome you to another week of O Ship.
Oh shit.
Pete, welcome to O Ship. How are you?
It's good to be here. I love that animation so much, Freddie. It brings a smile to my face right at the end with the poop on the logo.
So I have terrible news. This is a classic oh shit moment that's happening right here. I haven't got any audio.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't hear anything. We'll see if I can get this going in 2 seconds while I fix it. What I'd love for you to do, and this is the joy of this is why you have a show called Oh Ship, so you can do things live like this and make things really crazy for yourself. So what I'd love to do, if you could take a moment and tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit more about digital surgeons, because I'd love for our audience to have some of the context about you that I do.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, for one, I think we are both officially OGs at this point. The fact that we're talking about working in Flash, killing off Flash, and 18 years makes me realize, like, wow, I've been doing this for way too long, or whatnot. But yeah, so just a little bit of background. Thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. My name's Pete Sena. I cut my teeth in sports marketing and design primarily. So I was a coder as a kid, and at the time was writing software, and I just fell in love with design and just being sort of a hybrid geek, and being sort of in that world for so long. Kind of thought I was going to be a game designer, game developer, or software developer. Ended up finding marketing, and kind of got into marketing, and I never looked back. I just loved the ability to sort of use problem solving skills, design skills to really make things for brands and clients and that sort of thing. So that's a little bit about me, Freddie.
Love it. And thanks for saving my butt, Pete. That may have been the most exciting start for me personally into any show I've done to date, because nothing like getting a high energy show by being completely panic stricken within the first couple seconds of going live. So, anyway, so Pete, one of the things when I think about you and your background is thinking about you as a kind of a creative entrepreneur. And then there's all kinds of different folks and how they approach the business world. But for you, very much in my eyes, is a creative entrepreneur. What does that mean to you?
Well, a couple things. So one, I think for everyone tuning in that is not an entrepreneur or running their own business or one of those things, I coach a lot of creative directors, executives of different types. And one of the things I always say is, are you falling in love with the problem or are you falling in love with the tactic? So when I say I'm a creative entrepreneur, I'm an angel investor in a number of businesses. I operate Digital Surgeons, which is a brand experience consultancy, or an agency, whatever vernacular you want to use, depending on your background. But when I say I'm a creative entrepreneur, what I basically mean is that I fall in love with problems that help real people, whether it's a product, a experience, a service. And by doing that, I'm essentially building these businesses or having a hand in building these businesses, depending on, what my level of involvement is. Versus my early stage of my career as a creative director, as a tech director, I'm more so sort of serving a tactic or serving, one piece, one instrument in the orchestra, as I like to say to people often. So when I say I'm a creative entrepreneur, what that basically means is I'm coming through the design and technology and creative discipline. But really, my job is to take that and then deploy that from a strategic perspective versus saying like, oh, I'm in visual design or UX design. That's what I do all day. So it's really sort
I
of
mean,
bringing that lens there.
is that something you? I mean, is that a career path that people set out to, or do you think that's just something that kind of happened to you over time? Because you probably started in design, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, totally started in design, cut my teeth in sports marketing when you were fumbling with the audio, having an oh shit moment of your own over there. Yeah, no,
It's
basically
very exciting.
started out on the brand side, early first off my career, and then I realized that I had this whole hybrid world that I wanted to create. So, like most entrepreneurs at the time, I wasn't an entrepreneur. At the time, I was like, I want to design and code and make cool stuff for the internet. And
Yeah,
I looked around and I live here in Southern Connecticut. I live in the East Coast and I was like, all right, cool. So I can go to California to do that. At the time, New York wasn't popping the way it is now, right? And I'm like, all right, I guess I'll just start my own thing, right? So really, the beauty of what I think a lot of entrepreneurs do, or business owners, depending on how you look at that, is they see something, whether it's a problem that they see that they just are dying to solve for themselves or for someone else, or they see something in their head, like they've got a vision or an idea, it doesn't exist, so then they lean into it and they make it happen. And that's sort of what the birthplace of Digital Surgeons was I saw this converging design tech world. And at the time, digital agencies weren't all that popular, right? We're talking about the days of Moto Media, and some of the earlier OG agencies that really coined digital agency as a term. And that's sort of what I've been doing since day one. So that was my first cutting my teeth into business. And then from there, I fell in love with business and I fell in love with working with other entrepreneurs and helping those folks. So sort of been around the
that's
block and
cool.
back at this point, and that's sort of what I mean. What it means
I
to me.
think it's cool to fall in love with business. If you're a creative person, I consider myself a creative person, not like I think you're a creative person, but I think, if you can be passionate about was it like having both the left and the right side of the brain working in unison, I think you can come up with some pretty brilliant stuff.
They
Do,
fight
do you
often,
know,
Freddie. No, I wouldn't say unison.
it's fair enough. That's funny. I wanted to get into this subject around attempting the impossible, but before I do, I want to ask you another question about being kind of a creative entrepreneur. Um, you, you could argue that this is a specialist role that people have. What are the pros and cons to being a creative entrepreneur?
Well, um, if you want a healthy dose of crazy with your coffee in the morning, certainly do that. But no, in all seriousness, I think when I think about specialist versus generalist or practitioner versus entrepreneur, I think I've done many of those adjectives or things that I just described to you. I've been the full time designer, I've been the full time developer, I've been the full time business owner, I've been the part time investor or advisor, and I think what the past, now that you've reminded me of how old I am, thank you, Freddie. But the past 18
Sorry
years
about that.
have sort of really shown me through experiences, and I can only share the experiences that I've had, is just what it means to be a creative entrepreneur. And for me, that means being a creative generalist. I like to think of myself as a business Swiss Army knife because if you pull a Swiss Army knife out, it doesn't have the best saw, it doesn't have the best scissor, it doesn't have none of the things in there are the best. But
Mhm.
when you're facing peculiar problems or challenges or oh shit moments, which we'll talk about today, I'm able to sort of tap into that creative generalist mentality because I've got a lot of experiences in many things. Now,
Mhm.
what I think is a pro and a con about that is I've done a lot of work in I've played with machine learning. I've played with lots of different things. So that makes me effective in storytelling. That makes me effective in marketing and branding. But if I was trying to solve a breakthrough machine learning problem, I would not be the guy to do it or the gal to do it,
Mhm.
right? So I think here what's important to note is if you want to be the expert in one thing to go really, really, really deep, that's a powerful thing in itself. For me, I want to be the conductor of the orchestra. You know, one of my
Mhm.
sort of fictional inspiring mentors, which I never met, was Steve Jobs. Like I always saw like Steve Jobs wasn't a coder, he wasn't a designer, but he was a designer of experiences. And that's sort of what I've grown to love and really try to become throughout my career by having that creative generalist mentality. And even the term itself, entrepreneur, is in itself the idea of solving problems, but typically entrepreneurs become serial entrepreneurs and they get involved in multiple businesses. So that sort of
Serial
idiocy,
masochist, I think you
yeah,
mean.
serial masochist. Amen. So I hope that answers the question, Freddie.
Um, great, I think segue over. So when I think about attempting the impossible, and I was so excited when you said this would be a subject that kind of inspired you and we could dig into today. And again, it's a subject kind of near and dear to my heart. Do you think that attempting the impossible, and I think we'll define a bit more what I think that means in a second, but is attempting the impossible a sound business strategy, or is this more of a flight of fancy that creative people get, in your opinion?
Well, I'm going to quote the legendary businessman Jay-Z when I say difficult takes a
Solid.
day, impossible takes a week. Um, but no, in all seriousness, I think that we have to first define impossible because one of the things I've realized is that any type of success, whether it be moderate or breakthrough success, really comes down to either perseverance or just absolute luck. And I would say in some cases it's a mix of the two, right? But in all seriousness, what I would say is on that why I said difficult takes a day, impossible takes a week is I think you have to first unpack what is impossible, what makes something impossible. And I think one of the things we're probably going to talk a little about knowing you, Freddie, is just how I think and just the different mental models and ways to bring that together. So for me, what I like to think of is and is not, right? Like what are some of the truths that make something impossible? What I've come to realize is I approach things almost every single day, which at the beginning of the day feel impossible, at the end of the day
Mm.
sometimes feel impossible too, but in many cases once I can take that big thing and break it down into smaller things, that's where I can start to update my belief systems and the structures on how I think about that. And I can nerd out in terms of that. But I think, is it impossible? If you can understand what makes something impossible, then you can figure out a way to make it possible. And sometimes that requires an evolution of society or technology or things to come further along. Sometimes it just requires you to sort of go out into the void of not knowing and experiment like a scientist, which we'll talk about later today, and bring that to life. So I don't think that attempting the impossible is a flight of fancy. If anything, I think it's a noble pursuit if the problem you're solving is near and dear to you, or more importantly, as most entrepreneurs will realize, near and dear to a lot of people, because that's where you can find that
Mm.
sort of addressable market. I mean, there's a lot of things that even just the conversation we're having right now on this streaming software, like they probably spent millions of dollars to build that software, but they knew that there was a problem where they had to fix online streaming. And that's why the very platform we're talking on today got created. So I don't think attempting the impossible is a flight of fancy. I think it's what entrepreneurs and visionary leaders do. And it's why we see evolution in life, work, and business.
I'm gonna ask you a two-part question, and part of this is kind of feel kind of general, but I want to connect it back very specifically to attempting the impossible in a second. So,
So
upon self-reflection, and and I'd be interested to see if you think other people see you in the same way. Do you think of yourself as a pragmatic leader or more of a visionary type leader?
Oh, I don't have to think about that and tell you the answer. I would say visionary for sure. And I think if you were to ask my team, my clients, they'd say the same thing. But let me tell you why. This is not sort of my attempt to sort of pat myself on the back here. I absolutely, as a entrepreneur, as a consultant, as a leader, I am constantly having to be pragmatic. But one of the things I like to tell my teams and my clients is I'm in the business of unlocking progress and possibility, right? That's ultimately what we do, right? Marketing in itself is inherently understanding behavior and creating behavior change when done
Mm.
properly, right? Ethically, the way that I like to think about it. So for me, you can't go from pragmatic to visionary. you can
Mm,
absolutely go from visionary to pragmatic, right? It's like sort of like flipping over the triangle, if you will.
yeah,
If you start from a place of pragmatism, if you start from a place of impossibility and how things are today or how they used to be, then you can never imagine how they ought to be. You can never imagine that visionary status. So for me, visionary all day long. But that's to say, for all you pragmatists out there is a time and a place to be pragmatic. And I would be completely unsuccessful if I didn't have incredible operational, pragmatic people around me throughout these years. Because
yeah.
anybody who believes they can do it themselves and always be in that space of big ideas, they're full of, you know what. So, can we
It's
swear on the
it's it's
show,
so
Freddie?
funny. You kind of got into where I was going to go with this. I was interested to see your brain kind of go there on its own, which is, I think there's some real merit to saying like, look, if you try these really um, big, ambitious, bold ideas, and we'll talk about some very specific examples of that, I'm sure, in a second. Um, when you try them, yeah, having the big vision is really important. But actually, I think part of what makes impossible ideas possible is breaking them down into smaller, conquerable mountains, and saying, "Look, I'm not sure if I got the whole thing yet, but I feel like if I could get this bit and this bit and this bit, I think that other thing will kind of happen, right?" And so there's something about being very pragmatic in how you try and solve these things that make them feel achievable. If it's so visionary, sometimes I find that um, you'll let the ideas get out of control in some sense, and the pragmatist in sounds like in you, and certainly in the way I think about some of this stuff, is actually what makes you pull these things off. You don't you can spin out if you try and solve it all at one time, and I think there's some real merit in kind of looking at it in that way. So very, very, very interesting. um
There's a
so
reason. There's a reason why I have a mandala in the background. Speaking of spinning out,
it's funny. So what's the backstory?
so I mean, listen, like many creatives, it can be a bit of mania in your head.
Yeah.
And I mean, a couple of years ago, before I found meditation or any smart versions of self care, like I 100% spun out and had a full on mental breakdown, and found myself making a choice between what the hell I was going to do. But yeah, no, all jokes aside, I think it if you're always in the space of big ideas, it's really easy for you to fall apart in a lot of ways, because I think what ends up happening is if you're always living in the space of what could happen and how the world isn't yet, it's really easy to sort of get a lot of dissonance between the future and the present. And what I've come to realize, so a lot of people have referred to me as a futurist. I don't disagree or reject that term. In fact, I accept it. But you can't call yourself a futurist, right? So a lot of people have called me a futurist, and I accept that
Or
term.
guru. Self-proclaimed gurus are my
Call
other
me a
pet
guru, and
peeve.
I'm hitting the exit button right now, Freddie. Don't call me guru,
Exactly.
right? No, I'm not your guru, Tony Robbins. But no, so seriously, like I think that it's the pursuit of achieving the impossible ultimately comes down to having present moment awareness for where you're at and where you're going in the future. So we do these big enterprise workshops. We've got Fortune 500 clients that we're working with right now. And one of the things I do with our clients all the time is I ask them what their favorite movies are, because it humanizes them a bit. And one of the things I always hope for is I hope someone says Back to the Future. If they don't say that, I find a way to weave it into the conversation. And as crazy as this might sound, and you might be thinking, wow, this is so tangential, but it's not. The truth of the matter is you've seen Back to the Future, I'd imagine, Freddie, right?
Of course, yeah. Maybe
Okay.
only maybe 40 or 50 times, probably not that many times.
Okay, I was gonna say if you had said no, I was gonna get really worried, but I sort of knew that you were
You're
gonna say
like, our friendship is over.
it's
You are dead
over.
to
It's
me.
over here. It's over. But so what I like to do with people a lot of times is I say sort of imagine that moment in the scene where they got in the DeLorean for the first time. And what I do in pre-pandemic, we used to do this physically, with design thinking and post-it notes and whiteboarding and whatnot. Now we use a lot of digital tools to bring that to life. And I won't nerd out on the digital tools unless you want me to. But we sort of think about that DeLorean moment. We think in terms of storytelling, right? We don't want to be boring in these exercises. We get them to think about where they're at in the present day, which everyone knows where they're at right now, so it's easy to do that. And then we sort of hop in the DeLorean time machine. We get like fictitious. We start playing for a little bit. Believe it or not, fun fact: that's actually how we won Lego is by playing a very similar game. We then teleport ourselves into the future with this nice DeLorean, and I asked the question of, well, what's this future look like? What's it look like, sound like, feel like? We start mapping it out. right? And all these things feel impossible, kind of like when Elon put rockets in space, right? They're like, no way you're going to be able to beat NASA, like in some ways. But you go into the future and you do that stuff, and then you walk it back. And that's where, to your question, Freddie, about visionary versus pragmatic, that's where you got to bring the pragmatic side of your brain to the table and the pragmatic people to say,
Mm.
okay, yeah, we're 150 steps out in the future now to get there. Let's walk it back. We need to have this. What would need to happen or what wouldn't need to happen? And that's where we start
Mm.
bringing in the fancy mental models and stuff that I'll just try to keep it simple today because maybe not everyone's as nerdy and geeky as I am, but that sort of present state, future state, and then walking it back is how I achieve the impossible and how I help our clients achieve the impossible because everything was impossible before it was possible.
Yeah, I'd like to get specific on this for a second. One of the things you mentioned a second ago was you're saying, hey, sometimes I can spin out on stuff, and I
Mhm.
think when you start thinking about, you look at people who may be watching live or watching any of the pre-recorded shows of our ship out there, and they're hearing all this, and they're feeling very inspired, and they want to go out there, or they think about times maybe they've tried to take on impossible tasks, and it can feel daunting, and it can make you spin out, and so. I was wondering if you had any tips, tricks, tools, I don't know, anything that you use, whether it's technology, best practices, frameworks, I don't know, like how do you get through these things to let you get to the other side of these mountains, basically?
Yeah. So I'm a very visual kinesthetic person, obviously coming from a background in design and technology. So I have a lot of exercises and toolkits that we bring to the table, which really a lot of them are born in improv techniques or brainstorming techniques that a lot of creative agency folks or brand folks probably have heard about. The one school of thought that I'm always sort of jamming down people's throats, even if they don't want it, is design thinking,
Mhm.
which again I can explain now if it makes sense, or
Yeah,
if you want to double
just
back.
for some people may not know what design thinking is, so if you could provide a little context there, that'd be awesome, actually.
Yeah, no, 100%. So the first thing is we all remember, I'd imagine even your youngest viewers now or in the future have probably been through middle school or high school at this point, if I had to
I
guess,
hope so.
hopefully. I hope
Some
so.
of them may be in their
Um,
30s and 40s and haven't been through high school. We'll see. We have a very diverse group here on our ship.
Love it. And no judgments here. But what I was going to say to being
Yeah,
a
no
bit
judgment.
playful here is we've all been taught the scientific method, right? The idea of
Yeah.
forming a hypothesis in that lab class, doing an experiment, observing the results of that experiment or not, drawing some conclusions from it, and then going right back through it, the number of times. So the scientific method is really rooted in a lot of ways in design thinking. Obviously, folks like um, Simon Hubert, who was the political scientist that was really coined the inventor of design thinking, at least what it was at first. IDEO uses design thinking a lot for how they approach industrial design and those types of things. But really, to simplify it, design thinking is a way of framing, validating, and solving problems. And I use design thinking from figuring out which restaurant I'm going to take my wife to this weekend because we're in the middle of a crazy pandemic, down to how am I going to help a Fortune 500 brand increase their market cap value by $500 million in 6 months, right? It's all rooted in the same thing, which is looking at where you're at, looking at where you're trying to go, but it's done specifically through what they call human centered design, which is basically just a fancy way to say you have to have empathy, you have to be present, you have to understand your audience, whether your audience is a user or a customer
Mhm.
or a CEO executive. Know your audience first and foremost, understand the way that they see the world, what are they thinking, feeling, and doing, and then going through that process. That's what design thinking is. So people think they hear
Mhm.
design thinking, they think it's like pretty fonts and colors, or in some cases I think
Mhm.
it's really funny too is some people think of design thinking as like the post-it parade. And what I think is hilarious, right? We've all seen like the post-it notes and looking intense on an agency website. But the reality is Elon Musk's a design thinker. Mark
Mhm.
Zuckerberg's a design thinker. Just because they're not prancing around with post-it notes does not mean that they're not design thinkers. So I
Mhm.
think that any great entrepreneur is in themselves a design thinker because they're thinking about the world through the lens of what's the problem, what's the audience, and what's the problem I'm solving. Design thinking is
Mhm.
just a curriculum and a series of exercises and things that you can do, which we teach to people. I teach shop people that are on the shop floor at a manufacturing company how to do design thinking. I teach Fortune 500 CEOs how to do design thinking. I teach high school and college kids when we're doing like different programs on our campus district in New Haven, Connecticut, teach them
Seems like it's
design
a
thinking.
skill that you could apply,
It's
lifelong
a
in any
life
way, shape,
skill.
or form,
It's a life
probably.
skill,
Yeah,
Freddie.
it is. Yeah. So a lot of empathy involved there. So I'm going to mix this up a little bit.
Do it.
Uh, I'm gonna test. We're gonna test, and you're gonna help dictate what your next question is gonna be.
Uh oh.
If I had to ask you, are you, do you want the good news or the bad news first? Which one do you always ask for?
Always bad news first.
Okay, well then you have dictated. I have to ask. It would not be oh shit if I did not ask you. Can you give us an example of where, attempting the impossible has blown up in your face?
Oh, Freddie, audience, I can give you. It's, how much
Shall I
time you got?
extend the show?
Yeah, no, like, we need to extend the show and do a couple episodes. But
Welcome to the first
yeah,
6-hour edition of Oh Ship.
yeah. So let me tell you about it. Let me tell you a story where I had I followed through with this activation, I would have ended up in jail, and in a
This
big
is always
problem.
a good
So
start.
yeah, good start. So it was a dark and stormy night. No, so I'm going to sort of withhold some information to protect the innocent here. But we had this massive CPG brand, global brand. If I was to share who they are, I would probably be on the phone with a lawyer, so I'm not going to do that. But it was a global CPG brand, and we had this incredible activation that was going to go off in San Francisco. It was right around the time of a Super Bowl. It was affiliated and associated with the Super Bowl, and we were essentially the activation concept was we were going to have a celebrity announce this product. It was going to be flown into an event on a drone and dropped off by a drone. And this was a couple years ago. So nowadays you hear drone deliveries and you're like, oh, Amazon's already doing that. Companies are doing that in Europe. Fine. But no, we were like avant-garde. We were early. No one was doing this. This particular celebrity was at the time at their peak. You would know who they are. They're still a very prominent name in the music entertainment space. Again, withholding the news, the innocent here. So we went out. We hired a industrial designer. We hired a fabricator. We built this crazy, amazing drone that could withstand a great deal of weight. And we were actually going to, we managed to build this thing. Again, we're a digital agency. So why are we building drones, right? So the activation was going to bring in, airdrop in a series of products, CPG food brand, and people could try the product, right? So that the audience that was there, we had the who's who. It was this amazing activation, experiential, the whole thing. And massive celebrity act comes in. It was a pop-up thing. At the time we did a drop on Snapchat, because Snapchat was like all the rage back then. This is pre-TikTok, right? But it was still Musically. And it happens. It's in San Francisco. All the hoity-toity, the news, the press, everything's ready to go under embargo. And the cops show up. And they're like, what are you guys doing? So obviously our event people show them all the permits. We had the permits. We did all the proper planning, or so we thought. And they're like, yeah, we just had a terrorist threat near an airport. So we understand that you have all the proper regulations. But if you fly this drone, we're going to arrest you and everyone involved. And there's going to be, and you're going to have,
Oh
we're
my
already on the
God.
phone with legal authorities, local authorities. And this was like big. So that was an oh shit moment that happened where our whole activation, the whole premise of our idea, which was this drone drop kind of concept, kind of blew up. And we had to lean into our core values at that point. And that's where core values are really important, is like being responsive to change is a big core value of us, and just resilient. Now, I'm happy to say that we figured out a way to spin it and all ended off well. We still got a bunch more work from that client. Nobody got fired. Nobody got arrested. It still had tons of impressions and was a very successful case. However, in my case, I mean case study, but
not,
like,
not law
yeah,
case.
not law. But
Civil
yeah,
case.
this is a really big thing, and it could have very quickly gone to shit, but it didn't.
Yeah. I can't believe I'm gonna do this, but because of the story that you just told, and I'm always a fan of a good friendly bit of one-upmanship. I'm going to tell a story that I haven't told publicly in a long time that I think
Do it.
is up there on the stupid level that you just shared. So thank you for inspiring me for this story. And I don't think we would have been arrested, but it certainly involved some legal stuff. Um, I think it was like probably like 2005, 2006. I'm looking at my calendar, making sure we're out of like, legal range of any repercussions. And so we were
Check the
doing this
statute of
huge
limitations.
campaign. Yeah, a huge campaign for Toyota. and they were launching this car, car called the Matrix, and this really cool campaign called "Your Other You." And this whole thing was like, when you're in the Matrix, you're like a whole nother other person. It's your other you, and it's kind of cool, edgy version of yourself. And the campaign that they had done at the time, basically was like it was like these alternate characters that would kind of go on these road trips, and you become this kind of other person when the Matrix campaign. And we basically had this idea, like on the digital campaign, like what if we took their idea and kind of flipped it? And the website was one of the most ambitious things we've ever tried to do. This was a prank that you would play on a friend. You'd punch in some information on them, and like a bunch of personal details, their home address, their gender, name, birthday, all kinds of like kind of inside knowledge details. And then you'd pick one of these characters, which is like a football hooligan, a heavy metal guy, and a guy in, I believe it was a raccoon suit. And then this website would play, and I'm not joking, a 7 day long prank. 7 days of once a day, a prank on this person. It was this interconnected story about one of these characters was basically driving across the country to come visit you. And they would set like, and they would do things like, it was really mind bending, like, especially for the time technology. We had stuff where like they were part of the road trip. They'd find they'd see a diner, and it had your name in it. And back then there wasn't all these dynamically generating video systems like we had, and we literally set up a render farm of like After Effects machines just sitting in the cloud, like producing these videos we were sending to people, and the character would be like, "Look, man, look, we're coming to see you," and your name would be up there, and then obviously the Matrix car would be there. And then one thing they talk about how they're getting close to your house, and it sounds like they pocket dial you, and we pre-recorded like something crazy like 1,700 names, so that when they
Wow.
pocket dial you, it's like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna go see Freddie, man, gonna see Freddie." And so apparently we freaked. Someone did this prank on like their grandmother or something,
Oh my
and it
god.
sketched this lady out so bad that she sued Toyota, and apparently was sleeping with like an axe or a machete or
Oh my
something
god.
under her pillow because she was convinced that these Your Other You characters were coming to get them. The campaign actually got nominated for oh god, what's the innovation character category? Like, it was a finalist for like the big innovation category, the Cannes Lions. It was a huge, massively award-winning campaign. But yeah, basically, basically someone thought we were our one of our campaigns had gone so awry that they were going to go murder someone. So
I love
yeah,
it.
these things can be a little messy at times.
Well, I
So,
think, look, I mean,
but it was one of the coolest, most ambitious things I've ever done,
I love
bar
it,
none.
Freddie. No, I love it. I
Yeah,
mean, it's like the way I look at it, right, is the best advertising, the best
yeah,
experiences are rooted in truth, right? So
yeah.
if people knew it was a gimmick, it wouldn't be as powerful. But I just feel bad for that person's grandmother that they played a prank on.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And by the way, I want to make sure I use careful. That was a massive group effort from a lot of really brilliant people, both at the campaign agency and also at our digital agency, Own Group. What I think is interesting about that, connecting it back to the conversation we had earlier, as a concept, it seemed completely impossible and insurmountable, but we broke it down to a lot of its core components. Like, okay, how are we going to crack the dynamic audio? How are we going to crack the video issue? And it really broke these down to these small pieces, and we just had to solve all those individual pieces on their own. And it did certainly make something that felt impossible, um, literally possible. So,
yeah,
so,
it's very
so
George Lucas, if you will. It's like,
yeah,
and that's why I think going back to your question earlier, Freddie, about like visionary versus pragmatic is one of the reasons that I want to be the conductor of the proverbial orchestra as a creative entrepreneur is I recognize that I know enough about enough things to bring it all together and stitch it together into a coherent
yeah,
picture, and then to sort of be that parser to tell that story between the practitioner that's making it happen and then the client and the different things. That sort of game of translation I think is so powerful because if you bring those things to life, you can really unlock new things. But if you're stuck in what is or isn't possible, you'll never get to, oh, well, dynamic audio is not possible because we can't render it fast enough. And it's like, well, what if we could render it fast enough? What would that look like? And it's
yeah.
like, that's where the design thinking stuff comes into play.
So, I put you on the spot earlier, and I made you give me an O ship story. It was a great one, enough so good I had to respond in kind. Um, But tell me an example of where you went for the fences, you attempted the impossible, what that project was, maybe, and what the result was, because I'd love to hear about when attempting the impossible really works.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the entire genesis of digital surgeons is in itself an impossibility. When I started that firm, we've worked with major celebrities, major brands, but there's been a lot of you shouldn't do this, you can't do this moments throughout the evolution of the journey of the organization. We've people told us it wasn't possible to launch a tech and innovation campus in the middle of Connecticut. You could only pull that off if you're, you know, multi gazillionaire with the right connections and whatnot. We pulled it off, right? When we were pitching against some of the biggest name agencies in New York, and we won many different accounts, whether it was United Technologies or Sharp Electronics or all the different things. Like I feel like at least once a week we're attempting the impossible, whether it's like people saying this technology is not possible, or hey, you and your partner, like you never ran an agency, you don't know anything about the agency space. I often feel like what is impossible to some people feels completely possible to other people. Like for me, like I look at impossible things that people freak out over and I get excited about it. I love to be able to break that down. I take what's called a first principles approach to things, and that term's been really made famous by Elon Musk. Specifically, like this story's been beat to death. So you've probably read about like how he thought about launching rockets in space with SpaceX, and like how he broke down like why does a rocket cost so much. So like one of the ways I just want to offer this up for the audience now or in the future is I play a game called Five Whys, which is a big design thinking thing. I do that with almost every single time I'm approaching an impossible problem. So let me give you an example of an impossible problem that we helped solve recently. So I'm just trying to think about how much I can share of it. So we had a this is always the fun part about being put on the spot is like what can I share that is greenlit, right? So when I think about an impossible story for us, a lot of times it comes down to launching something that has a crazy deadline or a series of like red tape things that happen. So a lot of times, one of the things that we do, we have this thing called an IO sprint, which just stands for Insights and Opportunity Sprint. So we're working with a prominent Fortune 500 right now. So I can't say too much, but I'll talk a little bit about it. They are one
So
of
they
the
have at
reasons.
least a 1 in 500 chance of guessing what it is.
Yes, exactly. They're one of the reasons why I don't know if you're vaccinated. It's not a question I'm going to ask you on live TV here, but I am vaccinated, and one of the reasons that a lot of people have been able to get vaccinated here in the states is because of the infrastructure and the things that happen to get these products from the labs all over the world into the hands of the pharmacists and the frontline practitioners that gave us that. So the whole thing that surrounds that, the user experience of that, the way in which those things happen, we've been working on innovating that for two very very large organizations, and there's been a lot of impossibility. There's been people have said, "Oh, legal will never get on board with that," or "This executive will never get on board with that," or "The sales team won't get on board with that." And our solution is to ask why, and then when those people respond to the answer of that, reparrot that back, reshare that back with them, ask why again, and then we can sort of keep going deeper. Typically, when you get to death, or when you get to like no more content, that's when you know you've gone deep enough down the five why thing. Typically, it's 3 to 4 whys before you get to it. They call it five whys, which again I can share some information with anybody that wants to know. Just hit me up on Twitter or whatever. But in doing that for this organization, what we realized is that there was a couple of people that had the ability to make this project successful or unsuccessful just by saying yes or no. And what we had to
Mm.
basically do is get those people in a digital room and work through with them. And what I've come to realize now is a lot of times people who will stamp something green or red, go or no go, comes down to them feeling like they're a part of the process and them feeling like it's their idea. So I think what we like to understand is like, what are the power structures or the regulatory structures that make something possible or impossible? And that's where I think design thinking, we bring the same toolkit to every one of our clients, and every single one of our clients has a different problem or a different challenge. And why does that same toolkit matter? Because it's rooted in human truth. So I
Mm,
hope that's specific enough. I can give you older stories that are more public now, but I think some of the most exciting stuff we're doing right now, we're doing some incredible stuff in the cannabis tech space. We're doing some incredible stuff in the blockchain space right now. A lot of it, I'm reticent to just sort of overshare on this conversation, but I hope that that story is at least specific enough for you and the audience as to how this technique can really be beneficial.
it's very very helpful. It's funny. I think I've got two more things I want to ask you.
Fire away.
Um, One is, you've shared some great insights. I love that insight a second ago about just kind of understanding the importance of bringing leaders that are, whether it's a client or design thinking, or both, to try and make make stuff happen. That you need to have them buy into the process and be part of the process. Um, what would you say is the single most important thing you've learned about being an entrepreneur in the digital space after doing this for 18 years? That's a big one. It's like asking someone their favorite song. So, but is there something that really, really stands out or pops into your head?
Well, there's speaking of spinning out, there's a flood of things coming through my head right now.
Gonna
Um,
get that framework out.
the one thing I would say, I stole this one from Steve Jobs, my invisible
That's
mentor,
fun.
right?
If
Um,
it worked for him,
but
it can work for
it
you.
have strong opinions, but keep them loosely held. That's the one thing that I would say, to be successful is learning is as important as unlearning. And I think that a
Hmm.
lot of times the things that got someone to get successful, like what got you here won't get you there. So
Hmm.
I think to continue to transform impossible into possible, you have to transform the way that you think and act. And I think what that refers you to do is unlearn some of your belief systems, some of your principles, and learn new ones. And I see that a lot with we work with a lot of C-suite executives and large companies, B2C, B2B, et cetera. And a lot of them are stuck in their ways because oftentimes the thing that made you become blockbuster is the thing that'll also make you become blockbuster. So what I like to say is sort of listen to the market. Those who try to beat the market fail, right? Like listen to the market, pay attention to the market, aka your customer, your consumer, whether that's your employees and what they need and want or your end customers. That to me is some of and again, that's way more than one thing, right? But I would say your mindset dictates your mindset and your actions will dictate your success and your failures. And I think keep going. For those of you that are watching this, I hope this has been somewhat helpful for you. Again, I would love to answer any questions you folks have. Hit me up on Twitter. I'm there all the time. Um, but I love this conversation, Freddie. This is fun. I think what you've made me realize is how much I enjoy taking on the impossible. And what I've also realized is how bored I get when I'm working on things that are just too possible or too
Yeah.
mundane. So it's one of the
Well,
things I love
I
about
have
you and
I have the
perspective.
perfect final question, I think, for you then. And in the spirit of, you talk about kind of great quotes you take from other people. I don't know who to attribute this one to. Someone in the chat or online, I'm sure, will tell me. But I've always loved that expression that perfect is the enemy of done. And now I don't want to project me onto you, but I'd be interesting to see, um, when you're attempting the impossible, let's say specific to maybe a digital project, whether it's marketing, it's digital experience, whatever it is, but something you're crafting from your world. When you're trying something impossible, is it more perfect, more important that it's perfect or that it's done?
Wow. Short answer is always progress over perfection.
Yeah.
The longer answer is, as a designer myself, someone who's extremely passionate about the role that form and function plays in an experience. Um, I think it was Reid Hoffman that said, and don't quote me, but we should probably double check this. But I think it was Reid that said, If you're proud of the first thing you launch, you waited too long. And
Yeah,
what
I
I
love
would
that. I've always loved that. That was Reid Hoffman. It's a
that
great
was read.
quote.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. So I'm glad the
yeah.
coffee kicked
Nailed
in.
it.
Awesome. Insert meme. But yeah, so that's what
I
I
have
would
a really
say,
short-term
Freddie.
memory, by the way, a really terrible memory. So, attempting the impossible for me would actually be the accurately quoting people. Like, yes, I got the name right again.
I used to have like I'll say it. So I have a 7-month-old now, and it's my first kid. And what I'll tell you is, before having a kid, I had a photographic memory. I was like the character Mike Ross on the show Suits, like literally like photographic. I can remember everything. Now, like my short term memory is going out the window. But yeah,
You're
that's
like,
that's
you're
what I
like,
would
you're
say.
like, what's the name of this show I'm on again? Oh shit. Okay,
Yeah.
God, thank
Yeah. Oh shit. Oh shit. But yeah, no,
God.
1,000%, Freddie. Like progress over perfection. But I do think though that one thing I really want to make sure to say before we wrap is, and this is, I probably should have brought this controversy up earlier, is I think MVP is the biggest crock of shit in the world. Minimum viable product, I think, is a defunct thing, and the best product owners and CEOs know that, because I think what's really important is minimum valuable product. And whether that's
Mm.
a feature for a product or a feature for an experience, you get one chance to make a first impression.
Mhm.
And as many times as people want to say like track, test, measure, if yeah, you can put something out there, see how people respond to it. We do a lot of digital experiences,
But if it
but
has no value, the automatic reaction is,
yeah,
well, this is rubbish, or
yeah,
has no
and there's a lot of ways to
stickiness, or
do
has
it.
no
So
engagement.
so what I would say is
I love
understand
that.
the first logical step of progress that you're trying to achieve.
Mm,
Again, one thing I want to offer up to the audience now and in the future, because I love this, just making impossible possibility.
mm.
If you're facing an impossible task, like shoot me a tweet. Like public Twitter is the best way to get free expensive consulting from me, because I'm like, oh, you just added me on Twitter. Like I've got 30,000 people now that I'm going to let down if I don't answer this. So a little
Yeah.
free, a little free tip, and you get one shot. um, just shoot me an impossible problem, and I'll think about like what that one first step is, one step leads to two, and then two leads to many. And what I like to tell people a lot is progress over perfection means understanding what progress looks like and feels like. So one step at a time, and impossible is possible for you.
That's great, and a very generous offer. I appreciate it, Pete. So, hey, so on that note, what is your Twitter handle? Are there any websites you want the audience to know about? Anything like that, if they want to learn more about you or any of your businesses?
Yes, I will happily shamelessly plug my Twitter. No, jokes aside, you can check out Digital Surgeons, the consultancy, on digitalsurgeons.com. As for following me, I'm pretty active on Twitter. I just, being a tech geek, it's just a platform that has always really been near and dear to my heart. So you can definitely get me there. And then I've got a personal website as well, petesena.com. But I would say if you want to really see like some of the exciting things that I'm up to, some of the impossibilities made possible, definitely check out digitalsurgeons.com. We've got a really exciting new update coming next month, so definitely stay tuned
Oh,
for
cool.
that.
Okay, great. Make sure
Yeah,
you
super.
send me that when it comes out.
Oh, you know I will. You know I will for sure. But yeah, I just want to say thanks to you, Freddie, and thanks to the audience. Love this show. Love what you stand for and what Chameleon Collective stands for. I've had just some incredible experiences working with you and some chameleons.
Oh, thanks,
And
man.
it's opened up a lot of new possibilities and new ways of thinking. So for anybody listening to this, this is, Freddie didn't put me up to this, but what I would say is I think Freddie and a lot of the folks we've worked with over there, especially Brett Colbert, who got Freddie and I connected. These folks are doing some really impressive stuff. I think they're thinking about
Thank you,
business
man. I
in a
appreciate
very
that.
different way. And I don't plug people a lot. I mean, you can follow me, see who I plug. I very seldom plug things unless I believe in them.
I'm in like a
So
short list of like really good tech gadgets and like hair care products or something.
yeah, no, I listen. I'm such a fanboy, Freddie. Like when I love something, I want to tell the whole world about it, because for me, that's
Thanks,
like
man.
it's future proof, right? Because you think about it like this, right? If if nobody knows about this cool thing, right?
Yeah.
And like I'll give you an example. My wife has this mascara that she just loved, and it got discontinued, and now we like search all over the internet to like try to find it because it's discontinued. And that's a great example of like, and she always finds it because she's like an FBI agent.
Yeah, yeah.
But I share that because I think that if you know something and you believe in it, whether it's a person, a company, a service, talk about it. Because the problem with is the world is like Yelp right now, dude. Like for
Hmm.
every great place, like people only shout and are loud about the negative shit. So my goal and everything, just so people know, like, why are you plugging Freddie and Chameleon? Like real talk in closing if you believe in something or someone, say something positive about it, because the problem is that there's too
Here.
much negative stuff out there, and people need to discover the goodness in the world. And the only way we're going to do that is tapping into a page from Tim Ferriss's playbook, which is like,
Mhm.
if you love the product, talk about it, and then other people will find it too, because word of
Mhm.
mouth is still the best form of
Mhm.
spreading the word. So I'll get off my
Thanks,
soapbox
man.
now.
That was very kind of you. I appreciate it. And for those of you who have been watching and today and listening or on to OShip on any of our audio podcasts or watching live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, whether you're watching it live or watching it after the show, we really, really, really thank you for tuning in today. The best thing you can do to support the show is share this video with your rest of your feed. Give us a like, follow if you're not already following, subscribe if you're not already subscribing, and please tell your friends. And if you're looking for more info on the show, check out oshipshow.com, and we've got links to all the different places that we stream, whether it's live or after the show. Pete, thanks again for joining today. I really had fun. This was a great, great episode. You were a great guest, and I hope to have you on the show again. Take care,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks for
everybody.
watching our ship.